Hi everyone, welcome back. If you're seeking calm, deep rest, and peaceful sleep, you're in the right place. Let's begin.
Welcome, friend, to another journey together. Tonight, you will unlock eternal wisdom that Buddhist masters have embraced for eons to calm the agitated mind and attain profound, restorative slumber. Feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. I'm going to share a meticulously curated collection of extraordinary Zen stories that unveil the profound mysteries of inner tranquility and emotional release. Each narrative holds a powerful, transformative lesson that can profoundly alter your connection to anxiety, frustration, incessant rumination, and the ceaseless chase for more. These are not mere tales for drifting off. They are meticulously preserved teachings from masters who comprehended a truth many of us have overlooked: that true peace isn't discovered by altering our external conditions, but by transforming our internal relationship with them. As the Buddha wisely stated, peace comes from within, do not seek it without. Over the course of our exploration, you'll uncover precisely how these timeless truths can reshape your existence. As we dive into these remarkable accounts, you'll observe something truly profound begin to unfold. The persistent grasp of worry will start to recede. The incessant dialogue of your thoughts will gradually soften. You'll find yourself effortlessly sinking into a state of deep comprehension and rest. So settle in profoundly now. Let your body surrender into whatever supports you. Take one slow breath with me, and as you exhale, recognize that you are about to receive teachings that have awaited you for a long time. Let us begin with our first story about the profound wisdom found in the simplest moments of creation. This is the story of the weaver's thread. In a remote village nestled by a winding river, where the sound of flowing water mingles with the gentle rhythm of daily life, there lives a weaver named Kiko. Her small wooden loom stands by the window of her humble home, and here she spends her days creating intricate patterns from threads of silk and hemp. Her fingers move with practiced grace, each motion deliberate and mindful, as if she is composing a silent symphony with fiber and color. The threads themselves seem to dance in her hands, some delicate as spider's silk catching morning dew, others strong and coarse like the roots of ancient trees. Yet under Kiko's patient guidance, each finds its place in the emerging tapestry, contributing to a beauty that none could achieve alone. One day, as golden afternoon light streams through her window, a traveling monk approaches her doorway. His robes are worn smooth by countless miles of walking, and his wooden staff bears the polish of many hands and many journeys. He has been watching Kiko work from the village path, observing the peaceful concentration that seems to radiate from her small workspace. "Kiko," the monk inquires gently, his voice carrying the soft authority of one who has spent years in contemplation. "What is the most difficult thread to weave?" Kiko pauses in her work, her shuttle resting motionless in her hand. The question seems to hang in the air like incense, requiring not just an answer, but genuine consideration. She looks at the threads before her, the completed portions of her work, the empty spaces waiting to be filled, and the countless spools of possibility that surround her loom. "Master," she replies after a long moment, "the most difficult thread is not the finest silk that requires the gentlest touch, nor the coarsest hemp that tests the strength of my fingers. The most difficult thread is the thread that is not yet there, the thread of tomorrow's work, the thread of the pattern I have not yet begun to imagine. The monk nods slowly, understanding flickering in his eyes like candlelight. And what would you say is the easiest thread to work with? Kiko's face softens into a gentle smile, the kind that comes from deep knowing rather than mere happiness. The easiest thread, Master, is the thread of this very moment. It is already in my hand, already part of the fabric taking shape before me. It requires no worry about what has been woven in the past, no anxiety about the patterns yet to come, only the gentle pull, the mindful placement, here and now. The monk bows deeply, recognizing that he has received a teaching as intricate and beautiful as any tapestry. As he continues on his journey, the rhythmic sound of Kiko's loom follows him down the path, a quiet reminder of wisdom found in the eternal present. The Buddha once said, "If you want to know your past, look at your present condition. If you want to know your future, look at your present actions." This ancient wisdom illuminates the profound truth that Kiko embodies in her daily practice. The only thread we can truly weave is the one passing through our hands in this moment. Why do we struggle so intensely with the threads that do not yet exist? Zen Buddhism reveals that our suffering often comes not from present circumstances, but from our mental entanglement with time itself. We exhaust ourselves trying to weave tomorrow's patterns while the thread of today lies waiting in our hands, neglected and unused. The mind, always planning and preparing, convinces us that happiness lies in mastering future threads or correcting past mistakes in our tapestry. Yet this very thinking pulls us away from the creative power available right now. Like Kiko, we can only weave one thread at a time, and that thread is always the present one. Consider how often throughout your day you struggle with invisible threads. The conversation you'll have with your boss tomorrow, the project due next week, the apology you should have offered yesterday. These phantom threads create a false sense of urgency, making us feel simultaneously behind and ahead of ourselves, never quite here where the actual weaving happens. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi taught, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This playful paradox speaks to the weaver's wisdom. We can appreciate the pattern as it exists, while remaining open to what wants to emerge, without anxiety about perfection or attachment to specific outcomes. The thread in our hands right now might be a difficult conversation that needs having, a simple task that deserves our full attention, or even the breath moving through our bodies. When we bring complete presence to this single thread, we discover that it contains everything necessary for the moment's pattern to unfold naturally. In Japanese aesthetics, there is a concept called wabi-sabi, the beauty found in imperfection and impermanence. A true weaver understands that some threads will break, colors will fade, and patterns will sometimes emerge differently than planned. This is not failure, but the natural rhythm of creation itself. The Buddha taught, "Do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it, but after observation and analysis, when you find that anything agrees with reason and is conducive to the good and benefit of one and all, then accept it and live up to it." The weaver's thread teaches us to trust our direct experience of this moment rather than our theories about past or future moments. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, notice what thread is actually in your hands. Perhaps it's the simple act of breathing, the the sensation of your body settling into bed, or the gratitude for the day that has passed? Can you weave this single thread with the same patient attention that Kiko brings to her loom? As the Buddha reminded us, the present moment is the only time over which we have dominion. By learning to weave skillfully with the threads we actually possess, we create a life of beauty, one mindful moment at a time. Our next story reveals the profound wisdom hidden in what remains unmanifested. This is the story of the sound of the unturned stone. In a mountain monastery where ancient pines stretch toward clouds and morning mist clings to weathered stone paths, a young acolyte named Jiro tends the gardens with passionate devotion. Each day before dawn, he can be found among the carefully arranged stones and meticulously pruned plants, his movements precise and purposeful. He waters each plant according to its needs, removes every weed before it can establish roots, and polishes the stepping stones until they gleam like dark mirrors in the early light. The garden itself is a masterpiece of restraint and balance. Moss grows in deliberate patches between stones, creating patterns that seem both planned and completely natural. Small bamboo fountains fill with water and tip rhythmically, their soft clacking marking time like a meditation bell. Cherry trees offer their blossoms briefly each spring, then return to elegant simplicity, teaching the beauty of impermanence through their seasonal cycles. Jiro takes particular pride in the stone pathways that wind through this sacred space. Each morning, he carefully polishes every visible surface, ensuring that visitors walking in meditation will find no distraction in dirt or debris. His attention to detail has earned quiet recognition from the elder monks, and he feels a growing sense of accomplishment in his service. One morning, as pale sunlight filters through the pine branches and birds begin their daily chorus, the master approaches while Jiro is bent over his polishing work. The old monk's feet make no sound on the stone path, and his presence brings a quality of stillness that seems to deepen the garden's natural peace. "Young one," the master says, his voice carrying both warmth and authority, "you are truly diligent in your care for this place. Your dedication brings beauty to what we all enjoy. Tell me, in all your time listening to this garden, what is the most profound sound you have discovered here?" Jiro straightens, his cloth still in hand, and considers the question carefully. The garden offers many sounds to the attentive ear: the gentle rustling of bamboo leaves in the morning breeze, the sweet songs of birds calling to their mates, the distant temple bell that marks the hours of prayer and meditation, and the soft trickling of water over stones in the small stream that borders the meditation area. "Master," he replies thoughtfully, "perhaps it is the song of the nightingale that visits the cherry tree each morning, or the whisper of wind through the bamboo grove, or the peaceful sound of water flowing over the stones in our stream." The master listens to each suggestion with patient attention, but each time he gently shakes his head, his expression neither approving nor disapproving, simply waiting. Finally, feeling somewhat lost, Jiro admits with humble honesty, "Master, I confess I do not know. Please, teach me." Without speaking, the master moves to a small moss-covered stone that sits half buried beside the main path. It is an unremarkable stone, weathered and ancient, partially hidden by soft green moss that has grown undisturbed for many seasons. The master points to it with one finger. "Listen carefully," he instructs. Jiro approaches the stone and bends down, bringing his ear close to its moss-covered surface. He strains to hear something, anything, that might be emanating from this ordinary piece of earth and mineral. Minutes pass in concentrated attention. but he hears nothing beyond the familiar sounds of the garden around him. "Master," he finally says, still leaning close to the stone, "I hear no sound at all." "And are you still listening?" the master asks. "Yes, master, but there is truly no sound coming from this stone." The master's face brightens with the gentle satisfaction of a teacher whose student has discovered something precious. "Precisely," he says with quiet joy. "The most profound sound in this garden is the sound of the unturned stone. It is the silence that allows all other sounds to exist and be heard clearly. It is the pregnant potential of what has not yet been revealed or disturbed." Buddha's wisdom reminds us, silence is not empty, it is full of answers. The deeper teaching here shows us that in our constant seeking for meaning in the obvious and dramatic, we often overlook the profound wisdom available in what remains unmanifested, unspoken, and undisturbed. Why do we so consistently seek truth only in what makes noise? Zen Buddhism points to our conditioning toward the dramatic and obvious. Like Jiro, we notice the beautiful songs, the flowing water, the gentle wind, all wonderful sounds that deserve appreciation. Yet we miss the fundamental silence that makes all sound possible, the pregnant emptiness from which everything emerges and to which everything returns. Our minds have been trained to value activity over stillness, speech over silence, and the revealed over the potential. We live in a culture that rewards those who speak loudest, move fastest, and produce most visibly. In this environment, the profound teaching of the unturned stone becomes even more precious and necessary. Consider the unturned stones in your own experience, the words you choose not to speak in a heated moment, allowing space for understanding to emerge. The problems you don't immediately try to solve, giving wisdom time to arise naturally. The decisions you don't rush into, honoring the intelligence of careful consideration. Zen master Huangpo taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." The unturned stone represents all the wisdom that becomes available when we stop thinking our way to understanding and start listening to what lies beneath our mental activity. In our daily lives, we encounter countless unturned stones. The pause before responding to criticism, the moment of not knowing that precedes genuine insight, the comfortable silence between friends that holds more intimacy than any conversation, the space between thoughts where creativity often emerges. These are the sounds of the unmanifested, full of potential and power. The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." Sometimes the most profound word is the one left unspoken, the stone left unturned, the silence left undisturbed. This is not passivity, but the deepest kind of action, the action of creating space for truth to reveal itself naturally. Meditation practice trains us to appreciate the sound of the unturned stone. In sitting quietly, we learn to value the spaces between thoughts as much as the thoughts themselves. We discover that wisdom often arises not from analyzing our experience, but from resting in the pregnant silence that underlies all experience. Tonight, as you settle into the quiet of evening, can you listen for the sounds of your own unturned stones? Perhaps it's the decision you haven't forced, the judgment you haven't made, or the problem you haven't tried to solve. What wisdom might be available in these spaces of not knowing? As the Buddha taught, in the end, just three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. Learning to let go includes learning to leave some stones unturned, trusting the profound intelligence of what chooses to remain silent and potential. Let us continue our journey with a tale about recognizing true value beneath surface appearances. This is the story of the empty bowl and the thirsty traveler. Along a dusty road that winds between distant cities, where merchants and pilgrims travel with their worldly possessions and spiritual longings, there stands a simple dwelling. Here lives a Zen master, known throughout the region for a single act of kindness. He offers cool, fresh water to any thirsty traveler who passes his gate. Beside the weathered wooden entrance, he keeps a humble wooden bowl, unadorned and simple, carved from plain oak and worn smooth by countless hands. The bowl itself tells a story of service. Its rim bears the gentle marks of lips that have found relief in desperate moments. Its surface has been darkened by sun and rain, seasoned by years of faithful use. Though it possesses no decorative elements or precious materials, it has served its purpose thousands of times, bringing refreshment to those who needed it most. On this particular afternoon, as the sun reaches its peak and the air shimmers with heat, a wealthy merchant approaches the master's gate. His silks are the finest money can buy, dyed in deep purples and brilliant golds that speak of extensive trade connections and successful ventures. His pack animals carry treasures from distant lands: ivory, spices, jeweled ornaments, and bolts of cloth that shimmer like captured sunlight. The merchant's throat burns with thirst, and sweat beads on his forehead, despite the shade of his elaborate parasol. When he sees the simple wooden bowl beside the gate, his expression shifts from relief to disdain. He examines the humble vessel as if it were somehow beneath his station, his fingers accustomed to silver goblets and crystal chalices. "Is this all you offer?" the merchant asks, his voice carrying both exhaustion and condescension. "A common wooden bowl? Where is your silver goblet, your crystal chalice? Surely a man of wisdom should provide something more befitting a traveler of quality." The master observes the merchant's discomfort with gentle understanding. Without speaking, he takes the simple bowl and walks to his well, where clear water rises from deep springs that have never failed, even in the driest seasons. He fills the vessel to its brim with water so pure it seems to hold light itself, then returns and offers it to the sweating merchant. The merchant hesitates, his pride warring with his body's desperate need. The water looks crystal clear and inviting, promising immediate relief from his parched condition. Finally, his thirst overriding his disdain for the humble vessel, he accepts the bowl with reluctant hands and drinks deeply. The water is everything he needs: cool, refreshing, sweet, with the taste of deep earth and clean stone. It flows down his throat like liquid relief, restoring his strength and clearing his mind. For a moment, he forgets entirely about the bowl itself, conscious only of the profound satisfaction of his thirst being quenched completely. "Thank you," the merchant finally says, feeling genuinely grateful as his body returns to balance and comfort. "That was exactly what I needed." But then, as he hands back the empty bowl, his earlier judgment returns. "However, master, a man of your supposed wisdom, should truly offer something more fitting for distinguished travelers. The master receives the empty bowl with the same calm attention he had shown in filling it. He looks at the merchant with eyes that hold no judgment, only patient understanding of human nature and its curious attachments. "My friend," he says gently, "the value of water lies in its ability to quench your thirst, not in the vessel that contains it. This empty bowl, when filled, serves its purpose perfectly. A golden goblet, if it holds no water, offers nothing to someone dying of thirst." The Buddha observed, "We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world." What emerges from this story is our tendency to confuse the container with the content, to mistake external form for inner essence. Why do we so readily judge value by surface appearances? Zen Buddhism reveals that our conditioned mind constantly categorizes experiences based on external characteristics rather than their actual ability to serve our deepest needs. We have been trained to associate worth with expense, beauty with decoration, and value with rarity, often missing the profound utility of simple things. This pattern extends far beyond material objects. We dismiss wisdom that comes in humble packaging while seeking teachers who display impressive credentials. We overlook genuine love from ordinary people while chasing relationships with those who possess social status or physical beauty. We undervalue our own simple acts of kindness while believing that only grand gestures matter. The empty bowl represents a profound Zen principle. True functionality transcends decoration. When we are truly thirsty, whether for water, understanding, love, or peace, what matters is not the elegant presentation, but the genuine capacity to satisfy our need. A simple answer that brings clarity serves us better than a complex explanation that leaves us confused. Zen Master Dogen taught, "To study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self." The empty bowl teaches us to forget our preoccupations with appearances and focus on what actually serves. When we drop our attachments to how things should look, we become available to appreciate how things actually function. Consider the empty bowls in your own life. The friend who offers simple presents instead of elaborate advice. The job that provides meaningful work rather than impressive titles. The home that offers genuine comfort instead of magazine-worthy decoration. The spiritual practice that brings real peace rather than social recognition. Our consumer culture constantly suggests that we deserve the finest vessels, the luxury car, the designer clothes, the premium experiences. While these things aren't inherently problematic, the story reveals what happens when we become so focused on the container that we lose sight of the content. We can spend so much energy seeking impressive vessels that we forget to appreciate the pure water of simple satisfaction. The Buddha said, "Health is the greatest gift, contentment the greatest wealth, faithfulness the best relationship." The merchant in our story possessed material wealth, but lacked the contentment that would have allowed him to appreciate the gift he received. His attachment to impressive vessels prevented him from fully enjoying the perfect water. The master's empty bowl also represents the Zen concept of beginner's mind, approaching each moment without preconceptions about how it should appear. When we empty ourselves of expectations about form, we become available to receive whatever content life offers with genuine appreciation. Tonight, As you drink from whatever vessel holds your evening water, can you appreciate the miracle of thirst being quenched regardless of the cup's appearance? Can you notice the empty bowls in your life that serve you perfectly despite their humble presentation? As the Buddha taught, better than ruling the whole world, better than going to heaven, better than lordship over all the worlds, is the first step on the path to truth. Sometimes that first step means recognizing that the simplest vessel, offered with genuine care, contains everything we truly need. Now, let us explore a Zen story about the illusions created by comparison and the light that reveals our true nature. This is the story of the monk's shadow. In a monastery where golden evening light streams across ancient courtyards and the sound of evening prayers mingles with the settling quiet of day's end, a young monk named Taiki struggles with feelings that gnaw at his peace like persistent hunger. Each day, he watches his fellow practitioners with a mixture of admiration and despair, comparing his own stumbling progress to their apparent mastery. During meditation, while others sit in perfect stillness, Taiki's mind races with thoughts like excited monkeys, jumping from branch to branch. When the community chants ancient sutras, his voice seems thin and uncertain beside the rich, confident tones of the senior monks. In discussions of Dharma, while others offer profound insights drawn from deep understanding, Taiki finds himself silent, feeling that his simple questions reveal only ignorance. The senior monks move through their daily activities with a grace that seems effortless. Their walking meditation flows like water over stones. Their work in the gardens appears more like dance than labor, and their presence carries a quality of stillness that makes others feel peaceful simply by being near them. Taiki watches these accomplished practitioners and feels his own inadequacy like a stone in his chest. Why can't I be like them? He wonders during long nights when sleep eludes him. When will I develop their wisdom, their serenity, their natural understanding of the way? These questions circle in his mind like crows, creating more agitation and taking him further from the peace he seeks. One evening, as the sun sinks low toward the horizon and paints the monastery walls in warm gold and deep amber, Taiki sees his master walking slowly across the central courtyard. The evening light stretches behind the old teacher, creating a long, dramatic shadow that extends far across the stone ground, reaching nearly to the opposite wall. Taiki's own shadow, cast by the same low sun, appears small and stays close to his feet. The contrast strikes him immediately. His master's shadow seems vast and encompassing, while his own appears insignificant and limited. Even their shadows, he thinks with familiar sadness, reveal the great difference between them. Gathering his courage, Taiki approaches his teacher with the hesitant steps of one who fears his question might reveal foolishness. "Master," he says, bowing respectfully, "I have been observing our shadows in this evening light. Yours stretches so far across the courtyard, so vast and encompassing. Mine always seems so small, so close to me. Even in our shadows, the difference in our spiritual development is apparent." The master stops walking and looks thoughtfully at both shadows, his own long and distorted by the low angle of the sun, and Taiki's shorter and more compact. A gentle smile appears on his weathered face, the kind of expression that suggests understanding rather than amusement. "Young Taiki," he asks with quiet curiosity, "tell me, When is a shadow at its longest and most dramatic? Taiki considers the question, watching how the shadows shift slightly as a light breeze moves the branches overhead. When the sun is low in the sky, Master, he answers. At dawn or dusk, when the light comes from near the horizon. Very good. And when is a shadow at its shortest? When the sun is directly overhead, at noon, when the light comes from above. The master nods with satisfaction, pleased that his student understands the simple mechanics of light and shadow. Just so, young one. Now consider this carefully. When you feel your shadow is small and close to you, it means the light is shining directly upon you from above. When someone's shadow appears long and dramatic, it means the light is coming from far away, at a low angle. He pauses, allowing these words to settle into Taiki's understanding like seeds finding fertile ground. In spiritual life, the master continues gently, when you see others casting long shadows of apparent wisdom and accomplishment, remember that this often means they are standing in the light of distant teachings, far from the direct illumination of present moment awareness. When your own shadow seems small, it may mean that the light of understanding is shining directly upon you, here and now. Ancient Buddhist wisdom tells us, comparison is the thief of joy and the enemy of awakening. Here we discover a profound truth about the nature of spiritual progress and the illusions created by measuring ourselves against others. Why do we torment ourselves so persistently with comparison? Zen Buddhism explains that the ego mind thrives on measurement and ranking, constantly seeking to establish its position relative to others. This mental habit, useful in some practical situations, becomes a source of suffering when applied to the inner journey of awakening. The shadow represents our projected sense of spiritual achievement, the image we create about our own and others' progress on the path. Like actual shadows, these projections change dramatically based on the angle of our perspective and the time of day in our understanding. What appears as impressive spiritual advancement from one viewpoint may look quite different from another. Consider how often throughout your day you cast long shadows of comparison. Perhaps you measure your meditation practice against someone who appears more disciplined, your understanding against someone who seems more learned, or your peace of mind against someone who seems naturally serene. Each comparison creates a shadow drama that obscures the direct light available in your own experience. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the middle way between spiritual complacency and the suffering of comparison. We can appreciate our current condition while remaining open to growth, without the mental violence of measuring ourselves against artificial standards. The Master's teaching reveals that short shadows often indicate direct illumination. In spiritual terms, this means that feelings of being a beginner, moments of not knowing, and experiences of humility might actually indicate that we're receiving direct teaching from life itself. The light of wisdom is shining right on us, creating little shadow because we're not standing in the way of its illumination. Long shadows, while sometimes impressive in their reach, can indicate distance from the source of light. In spiritual life, this might manifest as elaborate philosophies that substitute for direct experience, impressive teachings that keep us from simple presence, or complex practices that distance us from the immediate availability of peace. The Buddha taught, there are only two mistakes one can make along the road to truth. not going all the way and not starting. When we become preoccupied with the length of our shadow compared to others, we stop walking our own path. We forget that each person's journey unfolds according to its own timing and requirements. The monastery courtyard, where this story unfolds, represents the community of practitioners where we all live, whether in formal spiritual settings or in the everyday world. In this shared space, we can choose to use others' apparent progress as inspiration rather than intimidation, understanding that different people cast different shadows depending on where they stand in relation to the light. Tonight, as you notice the actual shadow cast by your body in lamplight or moonlight, can you remember that its size and shape depend entirely on the position of the light source? Can you apply this understanding to the spiritual shadows you perceive in yourself and others, recognizing that comparison reveals more about perspective than about actual attainment? As the Buddha reminded us, the only real failure in life is not to be true to the best one knows. When we stop chasing the long shadows of others and attend to the light shining directly on our own path, we discover that our truest spiritual work happens not in the dramatic projections of comparison, but in the immediate intimacy of this moment's experience. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a story about releasing the burdens of the past. This is the tale of the stone and the river's memory. High in the mountains, where ancient rivers carve deep channels through weathered stone and the sound of rushing water echoes off canyon walls, a wise hermit makes his home in a simple cave overlooking one of these powerful currents. For decades, he has lived here in solitude, watching the endless dance of water over rock, learning from the river's constant teaching about flow, persistence, and the art of letting go. Seekers climb the difficult mountain paths to find him, drawn by stories of his understanding and his ability to help people release the heavy burdens they carry in their hearts. They arrive dusty and tired from the journey, often carrying more than physical packs. They bring regrets, mistakes, and memories that weigh heavier than any stone. On this particular morning, as mist rises from the water and early sunlight illuminates the canyon walls in gold and amber, a middle-aged man sits before the hermit, with tears streaming down his weathered face. His shoulders shake with the weight of sorrow that has become his constant companion, and his voice breaks as he tries to speak of his pain. "Master," he says through his tears, "I cannot escape the memory of what I did 5 years ago. It was a terrible decision. One moment of anger and selfishness that destroyed relationships I treasured and caused pain to people I loved. Since then, not a day passes without this memory returning to torment me. It feels like a massive stone tied to my heart, dragging me down no matter how I try to move forward." The hermit listens with the patience of one who has heard countless similar stories, understanding that human suffering often comes not from what happens to us, but from our relationship to what has already happened. He sees the exhaustion in the man's eyes, the way past guilt has carved lines of worry into his face, aging him beyond his years. Without speaking, the hermit reaches down to the riverbank and selects a smooth, rounded stone from among the countless others that line the water's edge. The stone fits perfectly in his palm, polished by years of interaction with the flowing current, its surface bearing the subtle marks and indentations that speak of its long journey downstream. "Look carefully at this stone," the hermit says, holding it up to catch the morning light. "Do you see the marks upon its surface?" The troubled man leans closer, grateful for any distraction from his inner torment. "Yes, master," he replies, studying the stone's weathered contours. "I can see scratches and small indentations, places where it looks worn smooth, and others where it appears chipped or scraped. These marks, the hermit explains with gentle authority, are the river's memory written in stone. Each mark tells a story. Every turn the stone has taken, every fall it has survived, every encounter with other stones during its long journey downstream. The smooth areas speak of gentle periods when the water caressed it softly. The chips and scratches tell of more dramatic moments, floods, collisions, times when the current was fierce and unforgiving. The hermit pauses, allowing the man to contemplate the stone's surface, seeing it now as a record of experience rather than simply an object. But tell me, the hermit continues, does the river cling to these memories? When this stone tumbled over that waterfall last spring, does the river spend its time reliving that moment? When it crashed into another stone during the autumn floods, does the river hold on to resentment about the collision? The man considers this question, his analytical mind beginning to engage with something beyond his personal pain. No, master, he says slowly. The river just continues to flow. It doesn't seem to dwell on what happened. And the stone itself, the hermit asks, do you think it resists the river's flow because of its past experiences? Does it refuse to move forward because it remembers being tumbled or scraped? No, the man responds with growing understanding. It seems to allow the water to carry it wherever the current leads. It doesn't fight against the flow. The hermit nods with satisfaction, seeing that his teaching is taking root. The river continues its endless journey, embracing everything that enters its flow and releasing everything that departs. This stone, too, does not resist the river's movement. It allows itself to be carried, shaped, and transformed by each new moment of contact with the flowing water. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. This tale unveils the profound difference between memory and clinging, between learning from the past and being imprisoned by it. Why do we torture ourselves by carrying stones that the river of life has already released? Zen Buddhism points to several mental habits that create this unnecessary burden. First is our tendency towards self-identification with our mistakes, thinking, I am someone who did that terrible thing, rather than, I am someone who once did something I regret. This subtle difference determines whether past actions become stepping stones for growth or millstones that drag us under. Second is our misunderstanding of responsibility. We often confuse taking responsibility for our actions with endlessly punishing ourselves for them. True responsibility includes making amends where possible, learning from our mistakes, and then allowing the river of present moment awareness to continue flowing rather than dam it up with guilt and regret. Third is our attachment to the story of our suffering. Sometimes we become so identified with our pain that releasing it feels like losing ourselves. The weight of the stone becomes familiar, and we mistake this familiarity for necessity, not realizing that we can learn from our experiences without carrying them as permanent burdens. Consider the stones you may be carrying in your own life, perhaps harsh words spoken in anger that you replay endlessly, seeking to change what cannot be changed. Maybe missed opportunities that you continue to mourn, instead of remaining available for new possibilities, or relationships ended badly that you relive, rather than allowing their lessons to inform your present connections. Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, thanks to impermanence, everything is possible. The stone in the river teaches us that our past actions, no matter how regrettable, are also impermanent. They shaped us, but they need not define us permanently. Like the stone being smoothed by constant contact with flowing water, we can allow the present moment to gradually transform the rough edges of our guilt and regret. The hermit's action of throwing the stone back into the river represents the conscious choice to release what we've been carrying unnecessarily. This doesn't mean denying our past or avoiding responsibility for our actions. Instead, it means learning what the river teaches, how to let the flow of life continue without resistance, carrying us toward new experiences and opportunities for growth. The Buddha said, "If you want to fly, you have to give up the things that weigh you down." Each moment offers us the choice between clinging to the stones of past regret or allowing them to be carried away by the river of present awareness. We can honor what we've learned from difficult experiences while releasing our attachment to being defined by them. Tonight, as you hear the sound of water moving, whether from a faucet, rain on the roof, or the memory of rivers you've known, can you feel what stones you might be ready to release? Can you trust the flow of this moment to carry away what no longer serves while preserving the wisdom that helps you move forward more skillfully? As the Buddha taught, what we think, we become. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. By learning to think like the river rather than the stone, we discover that freedom lies not in avoiding the marks of experience, but in allowing life's flow to continuously smooth and transform us into something more beautiful than we could have planned. Let us continue on our journey with a story about discovering the source of true freedom. This is the tale of the student and the master's heart. In a peaceful monastery garden where cherry blossoms drifted like snow, a young student approached his teacher during evening meditation. The master sat beneath an ancient maple tree, twilight painting the sky in soft purples and golds. This student had been practicing earnestly for years, yet lately questions had been arising that reached deeper than formal instruction. Taking a seat beside his teacher, the student gathered courage to voice what had been troubling him. "Master," he began quietly, "when I was young, I had a deep desire for my family and loved ones to be proud of me. I wanted to excel in studies, to accomplish things that would make them beam with joy. Were you ever the same way?" The master turned his gentle gaze toward the student, seeing in the young man's eyes the same earnest longing that had once driven his own seeking. After contemplative silence, he replied simply, "Yes, I was very much the same." The student felt relief at this admission. "Why did you desire their pride so intensely?" he asked. "What was driving that need for approval?" The master smiled with tender recognition. "I wanted them to feel they had more reason to love and accept me," he said thoughtfully. "If I could make them proud, surely their love would be secure and abundant. But the reason I desired this went even deeper." The student leaned closer, sensing they were approaching something essential. "I sought their love so desperately," the master continued, "because I, in turn, would feel I had sufficient reason to love and accept myself. I was seeking permission from others to feel good about who I was. Their approval would be evidence of my worthiness even to myself. That was what lay at the root of all my striving." The master paused, watching the first stars appear. "But then one day, I awakened to a revolutionary possibility. I realized I could ask myself a different question. What if I could bypass all external validation and simply learn to love and accept myself unconditionally? What if I didn't require anyone else's approval to feel genuinely good about my existence? The student felt something shift in his chest as these words settled. I imagined what it would be like if my happiness no longer depended on outer circumstances, on whether people approved or disapproved of my choices. What if my sense of worth could be as constant as my own heartbeat, independent of any external validation? The student could feel his teacher's words pointing toward a freedom he had never considered. And that realization began your quest for self-realization? Exactly, the master nodded. That was when my true spiritual journey began, not with seeking something outside myself, but with discovering what was already complete within. After contemplative silence, the student asked, "And did you never again desire their pride? Did that longing completely disappear?" The master chuckled softly. "Oh, my ego certainly continued to desire approval. Conditioned patterns don't vanish overnight, but something fundamental had shifted in my relationship to those desires. I no longer completely identified with my ego as I had before." He gestured toward the darkening garden, where fireflies had begun their dance. "I learned to see those approval-seeking thoughts as passing phenomena, like these fireflies appearing and disappearing. I could observe them with interest and compassion, but I no longer gave them power to determine my worth." "So you still cared what others thought?" the student asked. "I respected their opinions and honored their perspectives," the master replied. "But I no longer gave them so much weight. Their approval became like weather, sometimes pleasant, sometimes not, but no longer the determining factor in whether I felt at peace with myself." The master's face radiated quiet joy. "And never had I felt so free as when I finally released myself in this way. It was like discovering I had been carrying invisible chains for decades, and suddenly they fell away. The love I had been seeking outside was revealed to have been within me all along." Buddha's wisdom reminds us, if you truly loved yourself, you would never hurt yourself with destructive thoughts, actions, or choices. This teaching points to the heart of the master's discovery. Most suffering stems from the mistaken belief that we must earn the right to love ourselves through external achievements or approval. Here, we discover one of the most revolutionary insights available. Self-love is not a reward to be earned, but our natural birthright to be claimed. We are born complete and worthy, not because of what we accomplish, but simply because we exist. Why do we find unconditional self-love so difficult? From childhood, we absorb messages suggesting love must be earned through good behavior, achievement, or pleasing others. We learn to treat ourselves the way we were treated, often with criticism and conditions. These patterns become so familiar that unconditional self-acceptance feels foreign. Our culture intensifies this conditioning by promoting the myth that happiness comes from external sources. Each message reinforces the delusion that we are incomplete as we are. Consider how much mental energy goes toward managing others' opinions. How often do you modify authentic expression to gain approval? How much self-worth depends on external feedback rather than internal recognition of inherent value? When we love ourselves unconditionally, we create a foundation of fulfillment that allows us to enjoy others' affection without depending on it. We can receive compliments with gratitude rather than desperate hunger, and handle criticism without devastation, because our core worth remains untouched. The Buddha said, "You can search throughout the entire universe for someone more deserving of your love and affection than you are yourself, and that person is not to be found anywhere. You, yourself, deserve your love and affection. This isn't narcissism. It's recognition of fundamental truth about consciousness itself. Tonight, as you rest in this moment's quiet, can you sense the presence that is reading these words? This awareness that knows your thoughts and witnesses your experiences is not improved or diminished by anything that happens. It remains constant and clear, like space itself. What would it be like to treat this aware presence with the tenderness it deserves? Perhaps you could offer yourself the same patience you'd give a beloved child learning, or the same compassion you'd feel for a friend in difficulties. As the Buddha taught, hatred is never appeased by hatred. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. Self-criticism is never healed by more self-criticism. Only by learning to love ourselves exactly as we are do we create inner conditions for authentic transformation. In discovering this unconditional love within, we find the freedom we sought through others' approval was always here, beating steadily in our own hearts. Let us now turn to a story about the deceptive nature of appearances and the masks we wear in seeking acceptance. This is the tale of the hungry abbot and the generous robe. In a bustling merchant quarter of an ancient Chinese city, where silk traders and wealthy families built elaborate houses behind high walls, there lived a man whose prosperity was known throughout the region. His mansion boasted carved jade doorways, courtyards filled with exotic birds, and servants who attended to every detail of daily life. This man took great pride in his position and was particular about maintaining his reputation among other prominent citizens. One morning, as autumn rain fell steadily on the cobblestone streets, a figure approached his ornate front gate. The visitor was a Zen abbot from a mountain monastery, but he appeared as nothing more than a beggar. His simple brown robes were patched and worn thin from years of use. His sandals were cracked and muddy from walking mountain paths, and his wooden begging bowl showed the stains and scratches of countless meals received in charity. The abbot stood quietly at the gate, rain dripping from his shaved head, and waited with the patient dignity that comes from years of spiritual practice. When the gatekeeper finally noticed him, the man's expression immediately showed disdain. "What do you want, beggar?" the gatekeeper asked harshly, not bothering to bow or show any respect. "This is the house of an important man. We have no scraps for wanderers." "I am traveling and seeking alms," the abbot replied gently. "Perhaps your master would offer a simple meal to a monk." The gatekeeper looked him up and down with obvious contempt. These ragged clothes, this worn appearance. Clearly this was just another vagrant trying to take advantage of his master's household. "Be gone," he commanded. "My master does not waste food on beggars. Seek your charity elsewhere." The abbot accepted this rejection without anger or argument. He simply bowed, turned, and walked back into the rain, his empty bowl tucked beneath his arm. Several hours later, as the afternoon sun broke through the clouds, the same figure returned to the same gate. But now everything had changed. The abbot wore his formal ceremonial robes, rich golden silk embroidered with intricate patterns, a magnificent purple sash across his shoulders, and prayer beads carved from precious wood. His bearing remained humble, but his appearance now spoke unmistakably of high spiritual rank and monastery wealth. This time, when the gatekeeper saw him approaching, his entire demeanor transformed. "Welcome, honored master," he exclaimed, bowing deeply. "Please Please enter. My master will be so pleased to receive such a distinguished visitor." The rich man himself hurried out to greet the abbot personally, offering elaborate bows and flowery words of welcome. "Venerable sir, what an honor for our humble household. You must join us for our finest meal. Please allow us to serve you." They ushered the abbot into their most elegant dining room, where servants quickly prepared a sumptuous feast. Delicate fish, perfectly seasoned vegetables, fragrant rice, and sweet desserts filled the low table. The rich man sat opposite the abbot, beaming with pride at his ability to host such an important religious figure. As the first course was served, the abbot did something completely unexpected. Instead of eating, he carefully removed his beautiful ceremonial robe and folded it with great attention. Then, with deliberate precision, he placed the folded robe directly in front of the feast, as if it were the honored guest. Standing up with quiet dignity, the abbot spoke clearly so all present could hear. "This meal is not for me, it is for the robe." Without another word, he walked out of the house, leaving behind both the magnificent feast and the rich man's stunned realization of his own superficial judgment. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, judge not by appearances. A rich heart may be under a poor coat. Here we discover how our fixation on external appearances creates barriers to genuine human connection and spiritual understanding. Why do we judge others so quickly based on their clothing, status symbols, or outward presentation? Zen Buddhism points to our conditioned mind's habit of creating categories and hierarchies based on surface appearances. This mental shortcut allows us to feel we understand people without the more challenging work of seeing their true nature. The rich man's household represents a pattern we all recognize in ourselves. How differently do we treat the well-dressed stranger versus the poorly dressed one? How does our attention change when someone mentions their impressive job title versus their humble occupation? How does our respect shift when we learn someone's wealth or poverty? This ancient wisdom illuminates our tendency to project worth onto external symbols rather than recognizing the inherent dignity of every person. The abbot remained exactly the same person in both encounters. His wisdom, compassion, and spiritual realization unchanged by his clothing. Yet the household's treatment of him transformed completely, based solely on appearances. Look deeply at your own patterns of judgment. Perhaps you find yourself making assumptions about people in expensive cars versus old vehicles, designer clothes versus thrift store finds, prestigious addresses versus modest neighborhoods. Each of these judgments reveals how we've been conditioned to equate external appearance with internal worth. The story points us toward a fundamental question about authenticity. If we receive a different treatment based on our presentation, which version of ourselves is real? Are we the person in casual clothes running errands, or the person dressed professionally for important meetings? Are we the one seeking help, or the one offering it? In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called original face, the authentic self that exists beneath all roles, costumes, and presentations. This original face doesn't change whether we're wearing rags or ceremonial robes, whether others treat us with respect or dismissal. Zen Master Bankei taught, "Your original face is not born and does not die." This teaching invites us to recognize that our essential nature, our capacity for awareness, love, and wisdom remains constant, regardless of how others perceive us or how we present ourselves to the world. The abbot's teaching was not just for the rich man, but for all of us who might witness his story. By feeding the robe instead of himself, he revealed how often we relate to people's personas rather than their essence. We honor the title, the clothing, the symbols of status, while missing the actual human being present before us. Consider how this insight might transform your daily interactions. The server at your restaurant, the clerk at the store, the person asking for directions, each carries the same essential dignity as the most honored guest. The challenge is seeing past the uniforms, the circumstances, the social roles, to the original face beneath. This doesn't mean we ignore practical realities or social conventions, but that we hold them more lightly. We can acknowledge someone's professional role while remembering their fundamental humanity. We can dress appropriately for occasions while knowing our worth doesn't depend on our wardrobe. Tonight, as you consider the various roles and presentations you inhabit throughout the day, can you sense the unchanging awareness that witnesses all these temporary costumes? Can you feel the original face that remains constant, whether others see you as important or invisible? The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." The abbot's silent gesture spoke more powerfully than lengthy sermons about equality and compassion. By walking away from the feast, prepared for his appearance rather than his essence, he offered a teaching that continues to resonate across centuries. Now, let us explore a story about the difference between superficial understanding and lived wisdom. This is the tale of following the stream. In the heart of a vast wilderness, where towering pines stretched toward endless sky, two city dwellers found themselves completely lost. They had ventured into the high timber for what was supposed to be a simple day hike, but overconfidence and poor preparation had led them far from any familiar trail. For a day and a night, they wandered through the dense forest, their anxiety growing with each passing hour. The comfortable urban world they knew seemed impossibly distant. Every tree looked the same. Every path led to another confusing intersection, and their sense of direction had completely abandoned them. Just as panic was beginning to set in, they stumbled upon an old hermit sitting peacefully beside a small clearing. His weathered face spoke of years spent in solitude, and his calm presence offered immediate comfort to the desperate travelers. "How do we find our way back to civilization?" they asked urgently, their voices carrying the desperation of people who had exhausted their own resources. The hermit looked at them with kind eyes that seemed to see more than their immediate predicament. "I could tell you," he replied thoughtfully, "but you'd still get lost." The two men exchanged confused glances. This wasn't the straightforward directions they had hoped for. "What should we do?" they asked, their frustration evident. "Go with the flow," the hermit answered simply. "I beg your pardon," one of them responded, clearly expecting something more practical and specific. The hermit smiled and gestured toward a small stream that bubbled cheerfully through the clearing. "Go with the flow. You see that stream over there? Just follow it. Streams go into creeks, and creeks go into rivers, and rivers go through towns. Also, along the way you'll have water to drink and berries to eat." This practical advice made immediate sense to the lost travelers. Following water downstream was indeed a reliable way to find human settlements, and the stream would provide essential resources they needed for survival during their journey. But one of the men, perhaps having heard spiritual teachings before, asked a deeper question. "Is that what Zen people mean when they say, 'go with the flow'?" The hermit paused for a moment, considering this question with the same careful attention he had given their practical need for directions. "Yes and no," he replied enigmatically, and then continued along his way, leaving the two men to find their own understanding of his words. The Buddha once said, "If you understand, things are just as they are. If you do not understand, things are just as they are." This teaching points to the layered nature of wisdom that the hermit embodied in his response to the lost travelers. The deeper teaching here shows us how authentic spiritual guidance operates on multiple levels simultaneously. The hermit's advice was both completely practical and profoundly metaphorical. On the surface level, following the stream was simply good wilderness survival strategy. On a deeper level, it represented the entire approach to living that Zen encourages. Why did the hermit say the travelers would still get lost, even if he gave them directions? This points to a fundamental truth about the difference between receiving information and developing wisdom. External directions can guide us temporarily, but they don't develop our inner capacity for navigation. Real wisdom involves learning to read the natural signs and flow with the underlying currents of life itself. Consider how this applies to our spiritual seeking. We often approach teachers and teachings looking for specific directions. Tell me exactly what to do to become enlightened. Give me the precise meditation technique that will solve my problems. But this approach, while understandable, misses the deeper point. True spiritual guidance doesn't provide a map, but teaches us how to read the territory. It doesn't give us someone else's answers, but helps us develop the capacity to find our own. Like the stream that naturally knows its way to the ocean, we each have an innate wisdom that can guide us if we learn to trust and follow it. The phrase "go with the flow" has become so common in popular culture that it's almost lost its meaning, often interpreted as passive resignation or lack of direction. But the hermit's yes and no response points to a more nuanced understanding. True flowing isn't about drifting aimlessly, but about aligning our efforts with the natural currents of wisdom and compassion. The stream represents the Tao, the natural way that underlies all existence. When we align ourselves with this deeper flow, our actions become effortless and effective. We stop pushing against reality and learn to work with the grain of existence rather than against it. But this requires developing a different kind of intelligence than our usual problem-solving mind. The travelers wanted explicit directions because that's how the rational mind works, through clear, step-by-step instructions. But the deeper intelligence the hermit was pointing toward operates more like intuition, sensing the right direction moment by moment rather than following a predetermined plan. This is why contemplative traditions emphasize present moment awareness. The stream doesn't need to know where the ocean is. It simply flows in the direction that feels natural right now. Similarly, when we develop moment-to-moment mindfulness, we can sense the appropriate response to each situation without needing to figure out the entire journey in advance. Tonight, as you navigate the complexities of your own life, can you sense the streams of natural wisdom flowing beneath the surface of your daily concerns? What would it mean to trust that deeper current while still attending responsibly to practical necessities? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. The hermit's guidance was like lighting a candle in the travelers' minds, providing not just directions, but a way of approaching life that could serve them in countless future situations. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a story about the difference between resistance and flow. This is the teaching of the old man and the waterfall. In a mountain village where a swift river carved its way through ancient rocks, an old Taoist sage often walked along the water's edge, observing the interplay between the flowing current and the solid stones that tried to redirect its path. The villagers knew him as a gentle, contemplative man who seemed to understand something profound about the natural world that others missed. One afternoon, as storm clouds gathered and rain began to fall, the river swelled with unusual force. The current grew violent and unpredictable, rushing toward a high waterfall that dropped into a rocky gorge below. Most people avoided the area during such conditions, knowing that anyone who fell into the rapids would face almost certain death against the jagged rocks at the bottom of the falls. The old man, however, had been caught by the sudden storm while walking along his usual path. As he tried to make his way back to safety, the muddy bank gave way beneath his feet. Before he could catch himself, he tumbled into the raging torrent and was immediately swept away by the powerful current. Villagers who witnessed his fall cried out in horror. They ran along the riverbank, helplessly watching as the old man was carried toward the waterfall by waters too violent and swift for any rescue attempt. They could only watch in anguish as he disappeared over the edge, plunging into the churning chaos below. Everyone assumed the worst. No one could survive such a fall, especially not an elderly man with limited strength. The villagers prepared themselves to search for his body downstream, once the waters calmed enough to make such a search possible. But to their amazement, as they hurried toward the base of the waterfall, they saw the old man emerging from the water far below, completely unharmed. He walked calmly to the shore, water streaming from his clothes, and sat down to rest as peacefully as if he had simply taken a refreshing swim on a pleasant day. The villagers rushed to him, unable to believe what they had witnessed. "How is this possible?" they asked in wonder. "How did you survive that terrible fall? The water was so violent, the rocks so dangerous. By all reason, you should have been killed." The old man smiled at their concern and amazement. He wrung water from his sleeves and considered their question carefully before answering. "I survived," he said simply, "because I accommodated myself to the water, not the water to me. When I felt myself falling, I did not fight against the current or try to force it to change direction. Without thinking, I allowed myself to be shaped by it. When the water wanted to go down, I went down. When it swirled, I swirled with it. Plunging into the whirlpool, I came out with the whirlpool. I became like the water itself, and this is how I survived." The villagers listened in silence, beginning to understand that they had witnessed something far more than a fortunate accident. They had seen a demonstration of a profound principle that the old man had spent years learning from his careful observation of the natural world. As the Buddha taught, nothing is permanent. Everything is subject to change. Being is always becoming. Here we discover the wisdom of working with life's currents, rather than exhausting ourselves in futile resistance to forces beyond our control. Why do we instinctively fight against difficult circumstances when flow and adaptation might serve us better? Zen Buddhism reveals that our ego mind believes it can control external conditions through force of will. But this approach often creates more suffering than the original difficulty. The old man's survival wasn't mere luck. It was the result of understanding something essential about the nature of existence itself. When we align ourselves with the natural flow of events, rather than demanding that life conform to our preferences, we often discover resources and possibilities that resistance makes invisible. Consider your own relationship with challenging circumstances. How much energy do you spend fighting against situations you cannot change? The old man's teaching suggests a different approach, not passive submission, but conscious adaptation that maintains our essential nature while flowing with changing conditions. This doesn't mean accepting harmful situations or abandoning our values. The old man didn't give up his desire to survive. He simply changed his strategy for survival. Instead of fighting the water's power, he used it. Instead of resisting its direction, he moved with it while maintaining his awareness and intention. In relationships, careers, and personal challenges, we often face similar choices. We can exhaust ourselves trying to force outcomes, control other people's behavior, or make external circumstances conform to our expectations. Or we can learn to work skillfully with what is actually present, finding creative ways to achieve our deeper purposes through accommodation rather than force. Zen master Lao Tzu taught, "Water is fluid, soft, and yielding, but water will wear away rock, which cannot yield and is destroyed." The old man embodied this teaching, demonstrating that apparent weakness can be a source of tremendous strength when applied with wisdom. The Buddha said, "Hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule." This principle extends beyond hatred to all forms of resistance. Problems are rarely solved by fighting against them directly, but by understanding their nature and finding ways to work with the underlying forces involved. Look deeply at a current source of stress or conflict in your life. Where are you trying to force the water to change direction rather than learning to swim with it? What would it mean to accommodate yourself to the situation while maintaining your essential values and intentions? Tonight, as you encounter the inevitable currents of daily life, unexpected changes, difficult people, circumstances beyond your control, can you remember the old man's wisdom? Can you find ways to maintain your center while flowing with forces you cannot change, discovering that sometimes the most direct path to your goals is the one that appears to go around obstacles rather than through them? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, in the end, just three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. Learning to flow with life's currents is ultimately about letting go of our need to control everything while maintaining our ability to respond wisely to whatever arises. Like water, we can be both powerful and yielding, both persistent and adaptive, both strong and gentle. Let us now turn to a tale about the thin boundary between heaven and hell within our own hearts. This is the story of the samurai and the gates. In feudal Japan, a battle-hardened warrior named Nobushige sought out the renowned Zen master Hakuin. The samurai's armor bore the scars of countless conflicts, and his eyes carried the weight of a man who had seen too much violence. He approached the master's simple dwelling with a question that had been burning in his mind since his last campaign. "Master Hakuin," Nobushige said, bowing stiffly in his heavy armor, "I have spent my life fighting for my lord, facing death countless times. Tell me truthfully, is there really a paradise and a hell awaiting us after death?" Hakuin looked up from his tea, studying the warrior with penetrating eyes. "Who are you to ask such a question?" he inquired calmly. "I am a samurai," Nobushige replied with pride, straightening his shoulders. "I serve my lord with honor and have never retreated from battle." Hakuin's expression suddenly shifted to one of disdain. "You, a soldier!" he exclaimed with a dismissive laugh. "What kind of ruler would have you as his guard? Look at yourself. Your face looks like that of a common beggar, weathered and crude. How could someone so lowly claim to be a protector of nobility?" The words struck Nobushiga like physical blows. His face flushed red with anger, and his hand instinctively moved to the hilt of his sword. The insult to his honor was unbearable. "So, you have a sword," Hakuin continued, his voice dripping with mockery. "Your weapon is probably much too dull to cut off my head. I doubt you could slice through a rice paper screen, let alone defend anyone of importance." Unable to contain his rage any longer, Nobushiga began to draw his sword, the steel singing as it emerged from its scabbard. His entire body trembled with fury. His vision narrowed to focus solely on this insolent monk who dared to question his honor. At that precise moment, as the blade caught the afternoon light, Hakuin spoke with sudden clarity. "Here, open the gates of hell!" The words pierced through Nobushiga's rage like an arrow finding its target. In that instant, he saw himself clearly, consumed by anger, ready to kill over wounded pride, his mind clouded by fury. He understood that hell was not some distant realm, but the very state he inhabited in that moment. The samurai's hand froze on his sword as recognition dawned across his features. Slowly, with great reverence, Nobushiga sheathed his sword and bowed deeply before the master, his anger transformed into profound gratitude. "Here open the gates of paradise," Hakuin said gently, his voice now filled with compassion. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. What emerges from this story is a startling revelation about the geography of our inner world. Heaven and hell are not distant destinations, but present moment experiences we create through the quality of our consciousness. Why do we so easily find ourselves at the gates of hell? Zen Buddhism points to the three poisons that cloud our minds: greed, hatred, and delusion. When Nobushiga's pride was wounded, hatred arose instantly, transforming a peaceful afternoon into a realm of suffering. His entire reality shifted from curiosity about the afterlife to murderous rage in mere moments. The deeper teaching here shows us that we carry within ourselves the capacity for both states. Paradise and hell are not places we go to after death. They are experiences we inhabit while living. Each moment offers us the choice between the hell of reactivity and the paradise of awareness. Consider how often throughout your day similar transformations occur. A critical email arrives, and suddenly your peaceful morning becomes a realm of anxiety and resentment. Someone cuts you off in traffic, and the spaciousness of your drive contracts into a tight knot of irritation. A thoughtless comment from a colleague, and your contentment dissolves into hurt feelings and defensive thoughts. In Zen practice, we cultivate the capacity to recognize these moments of transition. Like Nobushige drawing his sword, we learn to catch ourselves at the very moment we're about to enter hell through our reactions. This recognition itself becomes the key that opens the gates of paradise. Zen master Huangpo taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." When we're caught in reactivity, we're rejecting the present moment, the master's teaching, the opportunity for awakening in favor of our thoughts about how things should be. The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." Hakuin's apparent insults were not cruelty but compassion in disguise. By provoking Nobushige's anger so skillfully, he showed the warrior exactly what he needed to see. That hell is a state of mind we enter through our own choices. This teaching invites us to examine our own triggers. What words or situations instantly transport us to hell? Perhaps it's feeling unappreciated at work, being misunderstood by family, or facing unexpected challenges. Each of these experiences offers the same choice Nobushige faced. Will we draw our sword or recognize the teaching? Tonight, as you notice irritation arising in response to some frustration, can you remember Hakuin's lesson? Can you recognize the moment when you're about to enter hell through your reactions and instead choose the paradise of awareness? As the Buddha taught, what we think, we become. In each moment, we are either opening the gates of hell through unconscious reactivity or opening the gates of paradise through mindful presence. Let us continue on our journey with a cautionary tale about the perils of spiritual superiority. This is the story of the clever monkey. In ancient China, the Prince of Wu decided to take a pleasure boat to the famous Monkey Mountain, a place known for its abundant wildlife and scenic beauty. The prince, surrounded by his attendants and guards, approached the mountain with the casual confidence of royalty, expecting the natural world to accommodate his presence just as his human subjects did. As soon as the monkeys dwelling in the forest caught sight of the royal party, they fled in terror. The sound of chattering filled the air as dozens of monkeys scrambled up into the highest branches of the trees, their natural instinct warning them to hide from these human intruders. The forest, which moments before had been alive with playful monkey calls, fell silent except for the rustling of leaves as the creatures sought safety in the treetops. However, one monkey remained completely unconcerned by the royal presence. This particular monkey seemed utterly fearless, continuing his acrobatic display with remarkable skill and apparent indifference to the danger below. He swung gracefully from branch to branch, performing elaborate leaps and displaying his dexterity as if putting on a show. His movements were fluid and confident, each gesture demonstrating his superior agility and intelligence compared to his cowering companions. The Prince of Wu watched this extraordinary display with growing annoyance. Here was a mere animal that dared to show no respect for royal authority, that seemed to mock the very presence of the prince through its casual dismissal of the obvious threat. The monkey's confidence appeared to be a direct challenge to the prince's power. Deciding to teach this insolent creature a lesson, the prince drew his bow and shot an arrow directly at the monkey. But to the amazement of all present, the monkey dexterously caught the arrow in mid-flight, plucking it from the air as easily as one might catch a falling leaf. The monkey examined the arrow briefly, then tossed it aside with casual dismissal, as if such feats were nothing more than child's play. The prince's face darkened with rage at this humiliation. His skill as an archer had been made to look foolish by a mere animal. "Attack!" he ordered his attendants. "Bring down this arrogant beast." A volley of arrows filled the air. The monkey, suddenly overwhelmed by the coordinated assault, could not deflect them all. In an instant, he was struck by multiple arrows and fell dead to the forest floor, his extraordinary abilities proving useless against such overwhelming force. The prince turned to his wise companion, Yen Puyi, who had watched this scene unfold with growing understanding. "You see what happened," the prince said. "This animal advertised his cleverness. He trusted in his own skill. He thought no one could touch him. Remember that. Do not rely on distinction and talent when you deal with men. Yen Pu-yi absorbed this lesson deeply. When they returned to the kingdom, he reflected on how his own accomplishments and reputation might be creating the same dangerous pride that had destroyed the monkey. He quietly became the disciple of a humble sage, seeking to rid himself of everything that made him appear outstanding or special. He renounced the pleasures that had once defined his status and learned to hide every distinction that might set him apart from others. Through patient practice, Yen Pu-yi cultivated such genuine humility that soon no one in the kingdom knew what to make of him. He had become so ordinary, so unassuming, that people began to sense something profound in his very ordinariness. Thus, they held him in awe, not for what he displayed, but for the mysterious depth they sensed beneath his simple presence. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Those who know do not speak, those who speak do not know." This tale unveils the spiritual danger of making our wisdom or abilities into a source of identity and pride. Why do we feel compelled to demonstrate our spiritual understanding or special qualities? Zen Buddhism reveals how the ego co-opts even our most genuine insights, turning them into tools for maintaining separation and superiority. The very achievements that should dissolve the sense of separate self can actually strengthen it when we become identified with being advanced or enlightened. The story points us toward understanding how spiritual pride operates. Like the monkey, we may develop genuine abilities through practice, deeper calm, clearer insight, or greater compassion. But when we begin to identify with these qualities, when we use them to distinguish ourselves from others, they become weapons that ultimately destroy us. This ancient wisdom illuminates a paradox at the heart of spiritual development. The more we genuinely progress, the more invisible that progress should become. True wisdom naturally expresses itself as humility because it reveals the interconnected nature of all existence, dissolving any basis for feeling superior to others. Zen teacher Shunryu Suzuki spoke of "don't know mind" as the essence of beginner's mind. This is not ignorance, but the wisdom that recognizes how little our conceptual understanding actually penetrates the mystery of existence. The monkey's tragedy was believing his cleverness made him special rather than recognizing it as a temporary expression of universal intelligence. The Buddha taught, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." Yen Pu-yi discovered that by hiding his distinctions, by becoming nothing special, he accessed a more profound kind of influence, one that touched others through presence rather than performance. Consider your own spiritual journey. Can you notice moments when insights or abilities become sources of subtle pride? When meditation experiences, psychological understanding, or compassionate actions become ways of feeling different from or better than others? Each time we make our practice into an identity, we create the spiritual equivalent of the monkey's dangerous display. Tonight, as you rest in simple being, can you practice the art of being nobody special? Can you find the freedom that comes not from demonstrating your wisdom, but from resting in the ordinary mystery of awareness itself? As the Buddha said, "Those who are free of resentful thoughts surely find peace." The deepest peace comes when we release even our attachment to being peaceful. Let us now turn to a story about the fundamental truth that governs all experience. This is the teaching of the meditation student and the wise reminder. A young student had been practicing meditation for several months with sincere dedication. Each morning and evening, he would sit quietly on his cushion, close his eyes, and attempt to follow the breathing techniques his teacher had shown him. Some days, the practice felt natural and peaceful, but recently he had been struggling with what seemed like constant distraction and discomfort. On this particular morning, he could barely sit still for 5 minutes before frustration overwhelmed him. His mind raced with thoughts about work, relationships, and a dozen trivial concerns. His legs ached from sitting in an unfamiliar position, and despite his best efforts to focus on his breath, he found himself constantly pulled away by mental chatter and physical restlessness. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, he gave up on his practice and sought out his meditation teacher. He found the elderly monk tending a small garden behind the meditation hall, peacefully pulling weeds in the early morning sunlight. "Teacher," the student said, his voice heavy with discouragement and self-criticism, "my meditation is horrible. I can't focus on anything. I feel so distracted and scattered. My legs ache constantly, and I keep falling asleep when I'm not distracted. Everything about my practice feels wrong. It's just horrible." The teacher looked up from his gardening, soil still clinging to his weathered hands, and met the student's frustrated gaze with calm, knowing eyes. He listened to the young man's litany of complaints without judgment or surprise, as if he had heard these exact same words countless times before. "It will pass," the teacher said matter-of-factly, then returned to his weeding as if nothing unusual had occurred. The student stood there for a moment, somewhat taken aback by the brevity and seeming dismissiveness of the response. He had expected detailed advice, perhaps some new technique, or at least some reassurance about his difficulties. Instead, he received just 3 simple words. Feeling somewhat unsatisfied but having nothing more to say, he returned to his room to contemplate this cryptic guidance. Over the following days, the student continued his practice despite his frustrations. Gradually, something began to shift. The intense distraction started to subside. His body adjusted to the sitting position, and moments of genuine peace began to emerge between the chaos of thoughts. By the end of the week, his meditation had transformed completely. Excited by this positive change, he once again sought out his teacher, this time finding him sweeping leaves from the temple courtyard. The student's face glowed with enthusiasm and relief. "Teacher," he exclaimed, "my meditation is wonderful now. I feel so aware, so peaceful, so alive during my practice. My mind is clear, my body is comfortable, and I am experiencing the most beautiful states of consciousness. Everything about my meditation is just wonderful." The teacher paused in his sweeping, looked at the student with the same calm expression he had worn the week before, and gave exactly the same response. "It will pass." This time the student heard the deeper teaching. His excitement about his wonderful meditation began to transform into something subtler, not disappointment, but understanding. He realized that his teacher was pointing to something fundamental about the nature of all experience, not just meditation. Buddha's wisdom tells us, "This too shall pass." The heart of this lesson lies in understanding the impermanent nature of all phenomena, both pleasant and unpleasant, both the experiences we cling to and those we try to escape. Why do we struggle so intensely with the changing nature of our experience? Zen Buddhism reveals that much of our suffering comes from our resistance to impermanence, our desperate attempts to hold on to pleasant states, and our equally desperate attempts to escape unpleasant ones. We exhaust ourselves trying to control what is essentially uncontrollable. The student's meditation experiences, both horrible and wonderful, were equally temporary. His teacher's consistent response pointed to a deeper stability that exists beneath the constantly changing surface of experience. This isn't the stability of unchanging conditions, but the stability of awareness itself, the space in which all changing experiences arise and pass away. Consider your own relationship with the ups and downs of daily life. How much energy do you spend trying to perpetuate good moods, successful periods, or comfortable circumstances? How much resistance do you feel toward difficult emotions, challenging phases, or uncomfortable situations? Both the grasping and the resistance create unnecessary suffering. In Zen practice, we learn to develop what might be called equanimity with impermanence. This doesn't mean becoming indifferent to our experiences or not caring about outcomes. Rather, it means developing the capacity to remain centered and responsive, regardless of whether current circumstances are pleasant or unpleasant. The teacher's repeated phrase, "It will pass," contains both comfort and challenge. It offers comfort during difficult times by reminding us that no painful state lasts forever. It challenges us during pleasant times by preventing us from building our identity around temporary successes or peak experiences. Zen Master Suzuki Roshi taught, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the same truth the meditation teacher was sharing. We can fully appreciate and engage with our current experience while simultaneously holding it lightly, knowing it will inevitably change. Look deeply at your own patterns of attachment and aversion. Where in your life are you trying to make permanent what is naturally temporary? Where are you exhausting yourself fighting against conditions that will shift on their own if you simply allow them to run their natural course? The Buddha said, "All conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with diligence." This teaching invites us to pour ourselves wholeheartedly into life while simultaneously holding all outcomes lightly. We can care deeply about our practice, our relationships, our work, and our growth, while remembering that all forms and experiences are temporary visitors in the space of awareness. This understanding transforms how we relate to both success and failure, both pleasure and pain. Instead of being thrown around by the inevitable fluctuations of life, we can find our stability in the awareness that remains constant while everything else changes. Tonight, as you notice whatever states of mind and body are present, whether comfortable or uncomfortable, pleasant or unpleasant, clear or confused, can you remember the meditation teacher's simple wisdom? Can you hold your current experience fully while simultaneously knowing that it, like everything else, will pass? As the Buddha observed, just as the great ocean has one taste, the taste of salt, so also this teaching has one taste, the taste of liberation. The taste of liberation is found not in achieving permanent pleasant states, but in discovering the freedom that comes from dancing gracefully with the ever-changing nature of existence itself. Now, let us experience a Zen story about the unexpected nature of enlightenment. This is the kitchen monk's realization. In the serene mountains surrounding Lake Hakone stood a great monastery known throughout Japan for its rigorous practice and deep wisdom. Among the monks lived a humble man named Ichi, whose life would teach us about the profound difference between seeking and finding. For 55 years, Ichi had labored faithfully in the monastery kitchen, while other monks sat in formal meditation or engaged in scholarly debates. Ichi chopped vegetables, tended fires, and prepared meals with quiet dedication. His hands had grown permanently stained, his back bent from years of service, yet he approached each task with careful attention. But Ichi carried a heavy burden. Since his earliest days, he had been assigned a koan, one of those paradoxical questions that Zen masters use to crack open the thinking mind. His was the famous puzzle: what is the sound of one hand clapping? Day after day, year after year, he wrestled with this question, trying to solve it through logic, intuition, every approach his mind could devise. As decades passed, Ichi began to see himself as a failure. While other monks seemed to progress, receiving new koans or achieving insights their teachers acknowledged, Ichi remained stuck with his unsolved puzzle. He watched younger monks arrive and eventually surpass him in status and recognition. 55 years, he would whisper while stirring soup. 55 years, and still I cannot hear what one hand sounds like when it claps. The question haunted him through every chore, every quiet moment, every season of his long service. Now, as his body grew frail, Ichi knew his time was approaching its end. He had been moved to a small attic room where he could rest away from daily bustle. As he lay there, in the gathering twilight of his life, something unexpected began to happen. Gradually, the familiar weight of striving began to lift from his chest. The desperate need to solve his koan, the shame of perceived failure, the constant reaching for enlightenment, all of it slowly dissolved like mist at sunrise. Gone was the fierce desire for awakening that had driven him for decades. In place of all that seeking, Ichi discovered something he had never expected, a profound peace that seemed to cradle his entire being. The soft darkness felt not like defeat, but like the gentlest embrace. His breathing slowed, and with it, the churning of thoughts that had occupied his mind for so many years. It was in this exquisite silence, when there remained no more questions nor need for answers, when even the need for breathing seemed to fade into quiet acceptance, that Ichi finally heard it. The whooshing silence of one hand clapping filled his awareness, not as a sound, but as the very nature of existence itself, the sound that had been present all along beneath all the noise of seeking. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Cease to cherish opinions, and you will achieve enlightenment." Here we discover that enlightenment isn't something we attain through effort, but something we uncover when the effort finally ceases. Why do we struggle so intensely with the very seeking that prevents us from finding what we seek? The mind creates a fundamental split between the seeker and the sought, keeping us perpetually reaching for something we imagine exists elsewhere, in some future moment when we'll finally get it. Ichi's story illuminates what Zen calls beginner's mind, the fresh awareness that exists before we complicate it with goals and achievements. For 55 years, he had sophisticated simple presence into complex spiritual ambition. The more expertly he sought enlightenment, the further he moved from the naturally enlightened awareness that had been with him all along. Consider how often we create this pattern. We complicate natural joy with the pursuit of happiness. We obscure natural love with the search for perfect relationships. We cover natural wisdom with endless accumulation of knowledge. Ichi's realization came not through solving his koan, but through finally letting go of the need to solve it. The sound of one hand clapping isn't a riddle to be figured out, but an invitation to rest in the space before thinking begins. The awareness that exists prior to questions and answers. Tonight, As thoughts about your own spiritual journey arise, remember Ichi's profound discovery. What if the very awareness that notices your seeking is the enlightenment you've been seeking? The sound of one hand clapping might be closer than you think, in the very listening that hears all sounds, including silence. As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. Sometimes the greatest achievement is the willingness to stop achieving and simply rest in what has always been present. Let us continue on our journey with a teaching about the dangerous gap between conceptual understanding and lived experience. This is the story of the one-eyed monk and the silent debate. In ancient China, when traveling monks wandered from monastery to monastery seeking teachings and testing their understanding, a particular custom had developed among Zen communities. Before a wandering monk could receive lodging for the night, he had to engage in what was called Dharma combat, with either the abbot or a designated representative. This wasn't physical fighting, but a contest of spiritual wit and understanding, where profound questions and paradoxical answers revealed the depth of each participant's realization. At one renowned monastery nestled in bamboo forests, a travel-worn monk arrived as evening shadows began to lengthen across the courtyards. His robes were dusty from mountain paths, his straw sandals worn thin, but his eyes carried the alert brightness of someone genuinely seeking deeper understanding. The abbot, busy with evening duties, assigned his personal attendant to conduct the traditional Dharma encounter. This attendant had served the monastery faithfully for many years, though he possessed what others might consider a disadvantage. He had lost one eye in an accident during his youth. Despite this physical limitation, or perhaps because of the clarity it had brought to his inner vision, he had developed profound insight into the Buddha's teachings. When the two monks met in the monastery's formal reception hall, the traveling monk proposed something unusual. "Let us engage in silent debate," he suggested, gesturing with his hands to indicate they would communicate through gestures alone rather than words. Sometimes the deepest truths transcend language altogether. The attendant nodded agreement, and they began their wordless exchange. The wayfarer raised one finger toward the ceiling, holding it steady with an expression of calm confidence. Without hesitation, the attendant responded by raising two fingers. The traveling monk, seeming pleased by this response, then raised 3 fingers. At this, the attendant surprised him by making a tight fist and holding it firmly in the space between them. The traveling monk's confident expression faltered. For a moment, he stared at the clenched fist, his face showing confusion and something approaching alarm. Then, without attempting any further gestures, he bowed quickly and left the hall. Soon afterward, he found the abbot and spoke with obvious respect and disappointment. "Venerable Sir, your representative is far too advanced for me. I must continue my journey rather than presume to stay in your monastery tonight." The abbot raised his eyebrows with interest. "Please, tell me what transpired in your exchange." "Well," the traveler explained earnestly, "I began by holding up one finger to symbolize the Buddha, the awakened one who showed us the path to enlightenment. But your monk immediately responded with 2 fingers, indicating the Buddha and the Dharma, both the teacher and the teachings he offered. So I raised 3 fingers to represent the complete triple gem: the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, the community of practitioners. But then he held up a clenched fist to show that all 3 are actually one unified reality. His understanding is clearly beyond mine, so I must seek instruction elsewhere before I could be worthy of staying here." The abbot listened to this interpretation with growing surprise. for he knew his attendant's character well. As the traveling monk departed into the gathering dusk, the attendant himself appeared, visibly agitated and breathing hard from running. "Where is that insolent rascal?" he demanded, his single eye blazing with indignation. "I've been looking everywhere for him. The nerve of that man! I've never encountered such rudeness disguised as spiritual inquiry." "What exactly happened?" the abbot asked, genuinely curious now about what had transpired between these two very different interpretations of the same event. "First," the attendant explained, his voice rising with remembered offense, "he insulted me by holding up one finger to indicate that I had only one eye. Can you imagine? Here I thought we were engaging in spiritual discourse, but he immediately drew attention to my physical limitation. Determined to remain polite despite such crudeness, I held up two fingers to acknowledge that he was blessed with two eyes. I was trying to show that I bore him no ill will for his thoughtless comment." The attendant paused to catch his breath, his agitation increasing as he continued. "But the scoundrel wasn't satisfied with that insult. Next, he held up three fingers to rub it in further, indicating that between the two of us, there were only three eyes total. He was deliberately emphasizing our difference, making sure I couldn't forget my disability. That's when I'd had enough. I made a fist because I was about to hit him for his persistent rudeness. But the coward saw what was coming and ran off before I could teach him proper manners." The abbot stood in stunned silence, contemplating this remarkable demonstration of how two people could participate in identical events while inhabiting completely different realities. The Buddha taught, "We see the world not as it is, but as we are." This profound truth reveals itself in the complete misunderstanding between our two monks, each of whom experienced the exact same gestures while living in entirely different interpretations of reality. Why do we so often project our own concerns, insecurities, and assumptions onto neutral situations? Zen Buddhism points to what it calls the 8 worldly winds: praise and blame, pleasure and pain, gain and loss, fame and disgrace. These psychological forces create internal weather systems that color our perception of everything around us. The attendant's sensitivity about his missing eye created a filter through which every gesture became a personal attack. His past experiences of being judged or pitied for his appearance had created such a strong interpretive framework that he couldn't perceive any other possible meaning in the traveler's hand signals. Similarly, the traveling monk's spiritual preoccupations caused him to see profound Dharma teachings in what were actually expressions of wounded feelings and growing anger. His framework of seeking enlightened instruction made him interpret increasingly aggressive gestures as increasingly sophisticated wisdom. Look deeply at your own patterns of interpretation. How often do your current worries, past hurts, or persistent hopes cause you to misread situations completely? Perhaps someone's distracted behavior becomes evidence they don't like you when they're actually concerned about a family member's health. Maybe a colleague's helpful suggestion feels like criticism because you're insecure about your performance. This ancient wisdom illuminates how our internal state creates our external experience. Both monks were sincere in their perceptions, yet both were fundamentally mistaken about what was actually happening. Neither was lying or deliberately misinterpreting. They were simply seeing through the lens of their own psychological conditioning. The story points us toward a crucial question. How can we develop the capacity to see situations more clearly, less filtered through our personal concerns and interpretations? Zen practice offers several approaches to this challenge. First is what's called don't know mind, maintaining openness to multiple interpretations, rather than immediately settling on the one that confirms our existing beliefs or fears. When someone acts in a way that triggers our interpretation, can we pause and consider other possible explanations? Second is mindfulness of our own emotional states. The attendant might have noticed his rising sensitivity about his appearance and recognized how this was coloring his perception. The traveler might have observed his eagerness to find profound teachings and questioned whether he was seeing wisdom where none existed. Zen Master Bankei taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way." This teaching invites us to examine the very mind that creates these interpretations, rather than constantly trying to figure out the correct interpretation of external events. The Buddha said, "Hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. This is a law eternal." If the attendant had met the traveler's perceived insults with curiosity rather than defensiveness, if the traveler had questioned his assumptions about enlightened behavior, their encounter might have become a genuine teaching for both. Tonight, as you replay conversations and interactions from your day, can you notice how your own concerns and sensitivities might have shaped your interpretations? Can you sense the difference between what actually happened and the meaning your mind added to those events? As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. By understanding how our internal weather creates our external storms, we discover the possibility of clear seeing that serves both wisdom and compassion. Let us now turn to a story about the most profound spiritual truth hiding in the most obvious place. This is the dialogue between Joshu and Nansen about the ordinary mind. In a quiet mountain monastery where morning mist drifted between ancient pine trees and the sound of temple bells echoed across distant valleys, two masters engaged in a conversation that would illuminate the very heart of Zen understanding. Joshu, despite his own considerable wisdom and years of practice, approached his teacher Nansen with the earnestness of a sincere student seeking to understand the deepest mysteries of existence. The two men sat facing each other in the temple's meditation hall, where countless seekers before them had wrestled with the same fundamental questions about the nature of awakening. Joshu's inquiry came from a place of genuine perplexity. After years of intensive practice, meditation and study, he still felt uncertain about the very foundation of the spiritual path. "Master," Joshu began with characteristic directness, "what exactly is the way? With all our practices and teachings, what are we ultimately seeking?" Nansen's response was immediate and surprisingly simple. "Ordinary mind is the way," he replied, as if stating the most obvious fact in the world. This answer clearly puzzled Joshu, who had expected something more esoteric, more complex, more removed from everyday experience. "If ordinary mind is the way," he pressed further, "then should we direct ourselves toward cultivating it? Should we make it our spiritual goal?" Nansen shook his head gently. "If you direct yourself toward it, you immediately go away from it," he explained. "The very effort to attain ordinary mind makes it extraordinary, and therefore no longer ordinary." Now Joshu found himself in what seemed like an impossible logical bind. "But Master, if we don't try to cultivate or attain anything, how can we ever know that this ordinary mind is actually the way? How can we recognize it without some form of practice or effort?" Nansen's final response cut through all philosophical complexity with razor-sharp clarity. "The way does not belong to knowing or not knowing. Knowing turns the way into a concept, an object of understanding, which is illusion. Not knowing turns it into blankness, which misses its vibrant presence. If you truly realize the way without doubt, it becomes like the great void, so vast and boundless that it contains everything. How then could there be any distinction between right and wrong, sacred and mundane, ordinary and extraordinary? At these words, something shifted fundamentally in Joshu's understanding. The seeking mind that had been grasping for answers suddenly relaxed, and he experienced a moment of complete clarity. Not the clarity of understanding something new, but the clarity of recognizing what had been present all along. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, there is nothing to seek and nothing to find. Everything is already here. The heart of this lesson lies in recognizing that what we seek through spiritual practice is not some special state of consciousness, but rather the ordinary awareness that is reading these words right now. Why do we struggle to accept that ordinary mind is the way? Zen Buddhism points to our deep conditioning that spiritual truth must be extraordinary, mystical, or dramatically different from our everyday experience. We imagine enlightenment as a permanent state of bliss, cosmic consciousness, or supernatural abilities, when in reality, it is simply the natural state of awareness without the overlay of seeking and striving. Our spiritual seeking often becomes its own obstacle. Like a person frantically searching for glasses while wearing them, we exhaust ourselves looking for something we already possess. The very effort to attain a special spiritual state creates the sense of separation between seeker and sought, between the ordinary self and some idealized, awakened self. Consider how your own mind works in this very moment. Thoughts arise and pass away. Sensations appear in your body. Sounds reach your ears. Emotions flow through your awareness. This natural functioning of consciousness, without any special effort or concentration, is what Nansen calls ordinary mind. It is already enlightened, not because it achieves some particular state, but because it is the very space in which all states appear and dissolve. Zen master Huang Po taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way, just like now, without seeking anything, without grasping after the fruits of Zen, just this mind that thinks and feels and perceives. This is Buddha." This ordinariness is precisely what makes it so difficult to recognize. We keep looking past it for something more impressive. The great void that Nansen mentions is not empty space, but rather the spacious awareness in which all experiences arise. Like the sky that remains unchanged whether filled with clouds or clear, this awareness remains constant through all the changing contents of experience. Joy and sorrow, clarity and confusion, peace and agitation, all appear and disappear within this unchanging background of ordinary awareness. This understanding revolutionizes our approach to spiritual practice. Instead of trying to achieve some special state, we learn to recognize the awareness that is already present. Instead of seeking to transcend ordinary experience, we discover the extraordinary nature of ordinariness itself. The sound of rain becomes as sacred as temple bells. Washing dishes becomes as profound as formal meditation. In Japanese aesthetics, there is a concept called wabi-sabi, finding beauty in imperfection and impermanence. This appreciation for the ordinary and imperfect reflects the same understanding that Nansen points toward. The way is not found in perfected states, but in the natural flow of life exactly as it is. Tonight, as you experience the simple fact of being aware of these words, aware of your breathing, aware of the sounds around you, can you recognize this ordinary awareness as what you have been seeking all along? Can you relax the effort to become something other than what you already are? As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. The way is not a destination to reach, but the very ground you are already standing on. In accepting your ordinary mind as Buddha mind, you discover that the spiritual journey was never about going somewhere else, but about recognizing where you have always been. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a story about how customs can outlive their purpose. This is the lesson of the monastery cat and the scholars who forgot. In a peaceful monastery nestled in the mountains, a community of monks dedicated themselves to regular meditation practice. Every evening, as the sun set behind the peaks and shadows grew long across the temple grounds, they would gather in the meditation hall for their most important practice session of the day. This was a time of deep silence and inner contemplation that had been maintained for generations. However, the monastery was also home to a particularly vocal cat who had made the temple grounds his territory. This cat had developed the unfortunate habit of appearing during the evening meditation sessions, meowing loudly, knocking over water bowls, and generally creating disturbances that made it difficult for the monks to maintain the focused attention their practice required. Night after night, the monks would attempt to settle into deep meditation, only to be interrupted by the cat's antics. Some tried to ignore the disruptions. Others attempted to gently shoo the animal away, but nothing seemed to work consistently. The cat seemed to have an uncanny ability to choose the most inopportune moments for his loudest and most distracting behavior. Finally, the spiritual teacher who led the community decided that practical action was needed. Rather than allowing the evening practice to continue being disrupted, he instructed his students to gently capture the cat before each meditation session and tie him securely in a corner of the hall where he could do no harm. This simple solution proved effective. The cat, though present, could no longer disturb the monk's concentration. Years passed peacefully with this arrangement. The evening meditation sessions proceeded without interruption. The monks deepened their practice, and the cat seemed content enough with his restrained position during the evening hours. This became the established routine that everyone accepted as normal and necessary. When the old teacher eventually died, the monks naturally continued all the practices he had established, including the evening tying of the cat. After all, this had been part of their master's wisdom, a tradition he had instituted for important spiritual reasons. They didn't question whether the practice was still necessary. It had simply become an integral part of their evening routine. In time, the original cat also died, having lived a full life in the monastery. The monks, now thoroughly convinced that having a tied cat was essential to proper meditation practice, went to great lengths to acquire another cat specifically for this purpose. They searched until they found a suitable replacement and continued the tradition without interruption. Generations of monks came and went, each learning from their predecessors that tying a cat during evening meditation was a crucial element of their spiritual practice. None questioned why this was necessary. It was simply how things had always been done in their tradition. Centuries later, learned descendants of the spiritual teacher wrote scholarly treatises about the religious significance of tying up a cat for meditation practice. They developed elaborate theories about the symbolic meaning of the restrained cat, its representation of taming the wild mind, and its importance in creating the proper spiritual atmosphere for contemplation. Buddha's wisdom teaches us, do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it. Do not believe in traditions because they have been handed down for many generations. This tale unveils how easily practical solutions can transform into meaningless rituals when we stop questioning their original purpose. Why do we continue practices long after their usefulness has ended, simply because they've become traditional? Zen Buddhism emphasizes the importance of understanding the spirit behind forms, rather than blindly following inherited customs that may no longer serve their intended function. The original teacher's decision to tie the cat was purely practical, a simple solution to a specific problem. But over time, this practical measure became ritualized, then sacralized, then analyzed as if it contained profound spiritual meaning that had always been intentional. Consider the various traditions, rules, and customs in your own life, both personal and cultural. How many of these practices do you follow simply because that's how it's always been done, rather than because they serve a current purpose? The monastery's cat represents all the meaningless forms we maintain out of habit rather than wisdom. This teaching applies to spiritual practices, workplace procedures, family traditions, and social customs. Over time, solutions to specific problems can become rigid requirements that persist long after the original problems have disappeared. What began as skillful means becomes empty ritual. In Zen practice, we learn to distinguish between the finger pointing at the moon and the moon itself, between the forms that serve awakening and awakening itself. The tied cat was never the point. Peaceful meditation was the point. But succeeding generations lost sight of this distinction. The Buddha said, "My teaching is like a raft. It is for crossing over, not for holding onto." The cat-tying tradition represents what happens when we turn temporary rafts into permanent shrines, mistaking the means for the end. Look deeply at the various practices and traditions you maintain. Which ones still serve their original purpose, and which ones have become empty forms you follow out of habit? What would it mean to honor the spirit of these practices while remaining flexible about their forms? The scholars who wrote treatises about the cat's religious significance weren't intentionally creating false doctrine. They genuinely believed they were preserving important wisdom. But their analysis was built on a foundation they didn't understand, leading to elaborate explanations of something that had never been intended as spiritual practice. Tonight, as you consider the various routines, traditions, and practices in your life, can you remember the original cat and the practical problem it solved? Can you distinguish between forms that still serve their purpose and those that have become meaningless repetition? As the Buddha observed, believe nothing merely because you have been told it. But after observation and analysis, when you find that anything agrees with reason and is conducive to the good and benefit of one and all, then accept it and live up to it. True spiritual maturity involves continuously examining our practices to ensure they serve their intended purpose, rather than simply preserving forms because they've become familiar. Let us now turn to a story about the difference between seeing and being seen, between wisdom and the appearance of wisdom. This is the tale of the blind man and his lantern. Late one evening, as darkness settled over the village like a soft blanket, a blind man prepared to walk home after spending the day with a dear friend. They had shared tea, conversation, and the comfortable silence that comes between people who truly know each other. But now, the hour was late, and the blind man needed to make his way through the winding streets to his own home. As he prepared to leave, feeling around for his walking stick and adjusting his cloak against the night air, his friend looked out at the pitch-black streets with concern. "Please," the friend said kindly, "let me give you my lantern to carry with you. The streets are particularly dark tonight, and there are many obstacles along the way." The blind man paused, surprised by the offer. "Why would I need a lantern?" he asked with gentle amusement. "You know I cannot see. The light won't help me find my way any better than darkness would. My feet know these streets, and my other senses guide me just fine." "Ah," his friend replied thoughtfully, "but perhaps the lantern isn't for you to see better. Perhaps it's so that others will see you better and won't accidentally bump into you as they hurry through the dark streets." This reasoning made perfect sense to the blind man. While he had learned to navigate the world without sight, he understood that others depended on their eyes and might not notice him in the darkness. "Of course," he said, accepting the lantern gratefully. "How thoughtful of you." The lantern was a simple but beautiful thing, made of rice paper stretched over delicate bamboo strips, with a candle secured safely inside. His friend lit the candle, and the warm glow illuminated a circle of ground around the blind man's feet. Even though he couldn't see the light himself, he could feel its warmth and knew that others would see him coming from a good distance away. Off he went into the night, the lantern swinging gently at his side as he made his way along the familiar path toward home. He felt confident and considerate, knowing that he was taking care both of his own safety and the safety of others who might be traveling these same dark streets. But he had walked only a few yards when suddenly, crack, another traveler walked straight into him. The collision was jarring, sending both men stumbling. The blind man's lantern swayed wildly, and he nearly lost his balance. "Why don't you watch where you're going?" the blind man called out indignantly, steadying himself and adjusting his robes. "Can't you see this lantern? I'm carrying it specifically so people like you won't bump into me." The other traveler, equally surprised by the collision, looked at the blind man's lantern and couldn't help but laugh. "My friend," he said gently, "why don't you light the candle? Your lantern is completely dark." The blind man reached toward his lantern and felt around the bamboo frame. Sure enough, the candle had gone out shortly after he left his friend's house, though he had been completely unaware of it. He had been walking through the darkness, carrying what he believed was a source of light, but was actually just an empty container, no more illuminating than if he had carried nothing at all. The Buddha once said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared." This tale unveils the profound difference between carrying the container of wisdom and carrying wisdom itself. Why do we so often mistake the form of understanding for understanding itself? Zen Buddhism reveals that we frequently become attached to the external symbols of insight, the books we've read, the retreats we've attended, the spiritual concepts we can discuss, while the actual flame of awareness remains unlit within us. The blind man's situation is deeply familiar to anyone who has walked a spiritual path. We acquire the lantern of teachings, surround ourselves with the framework of practice, and assume that possessing these things means we are illuminated. But unless the candle of direct experience is actually burning, we're still walking in darkness while believing we carry light. Consider your own spiritual or philosophical understanding. How much of what you believe you know is actually lived wisdom, and how much is merely conceptual knowledge you're carrying around like an unlit lantern? The difference becomes apparent only when we encounter the inevitable collisions of real life, moments when our understanding is tested by actual circumstances. In Zen practice, we distinguish between knowing about and knowing directly. You can study everything ever written about the taste of an apple, but until you actually bite into one, your knowledge remains second-hand. Similarly, we can accumulate vast knowledge about peace, compassion, or wisdom without ever actually embodying these qualities. The blind man was sincere in his intentions. He genuinely wanted to help others see him and avoid accidents. But his good intentions couldn't substitute for the actual function of a lit candle. This is the challenge of all spiritual practice, not just wanting to be wise or appearing to be wise, but actually cultivating the direct experience that makes wisdom real. Zen Master Dogen taught, "To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self." The lantern represents our self-concept as someone who is wise, spiritual, or enlightened. As long as we're primarily concerned with maintaining this identity, the actual candle of genuine insight remains unlit. The traveler who bumped into the blind man wasn't being cruel when he pointed out the obvious. Sometimes we need others to help us see that our candle has gone out, that we've been coasting on old understanding without tending to the flame of present moment awareness. Look deeply at your own experience. When do you find yourself carrying an unlit lantern? Perhaps it's when you offer advice you haven't fully integrated yourself, when you speak about peace while feeling agitated inside, or when you present yourself as having figured out something you're still actively struggling with. These aren't moral failures. They're simply signs that it's time to relight the candle. The beauty of this teaching is that discovering our lantern is dark isn't the end of the story, it's the beginning. The moment we realize we've been walking in darkness while believing we carried light, we can stop, find a source of flame, and actually illuminate our path. The lantern itself isn't useless. It just needs the essential element that makes it functional. In our relationships, careers, and spiritual practices, we encounter this same dynamic repeatedly. We develop the outer forms of expertise, the vocabulary, the credentials, the appearances of mastery, but sometimes lose touch with the living essence that originally inspired us. The marriage counselor whose own relationship is struggling, the teacher who has stopped learning, the spiritual practitioner who has become rigid in their practice, all are carrying unlit lanterns. The Buddha taught, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. One moment of genuine presence, authentic compassion, or real understanding illuminates more than years of accumulated concepts. The lit candle, however small, provides actual guidance in a way that the most beautiful empty lantern cannot. Zen practice continually asks us to check whether our candle is actually burning. Are we speaking from direct experience or from memory? Are we acting from present awareness or from habit? Are we offering genuine warmth and illumination, or just the appearance of these qualities? This isn't about achieving perfection or never having our candle go out. Candles extinguish naturally. That's their nature. Wind blows them out. They burn down. They flicker and fade. The practice is in noticing when the light has gone out and having the humility to relight it rather than pretending it's still burning. Tonight, as you consider the various roles you play and the wisdom you believe you possess, can you honestly assess which lanterns in your life are actually lit? Where are you carrying genuine understanding? And where might you be relying on the mere appearance of insight? Can you find the courage to acknowledge the dark lanterns without shame, seeing them simply as opportunities to rekindle authentic understanding? As Buddha's wisdom reminds us, 3 things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. Eventually, the darkness of an unlit lantern reveals itself through collision with reality. But rather than waiting for these inevitable bumps, we can choose to tend our inner flame with the same care we would give to any precious light, knowing that when it burns brightly, it illuminates not only our own path, but helps others find their way as well. Let us now turn to a tale about the courage to trust life's current. This is the story of the Crystal River. In the depths of a great crystal river, where water flowed clear as mountain air, there lived an entire village of small creatures. The river's current moved above them like a gentle breath, carrying the wisdom of countless springs and distant seas. Young and old, rich and poor, all made their home along the sandy bottom, each creature grasping tightly to stones, branches, and roots. For generations, clinging had been their way of survival. Every creature learned from birth to wrap their appendages around river rocks and fallen wood. "Hold on," the elders would say. "The current is dangerous. It will sweep you away to places unknown. Safety lies in staying exactly where you are." But one small creature grew weary of this endless grasping. Day after day, he watched the current flow overhead, seeing how it moved with such purpose and grace. While his neighbors complained about the effort required to maintain their grip, he found himself wondering what it might feel like to trust that flowing water. "I am tired of clinging," he announced one morning. "Though I cannot see where it leads, I trust that the current knows its destination. I shall let go and allow it to carry me where it will, for I fear that if I continue clinging, I shall die of boredom before I ever truly live." The other creatures gasped in horror. "Fool!" they cried. "Let go, and that current will tumble you mercilessly across the rocks below. You will be battered and broken, dying far more quickly than any boredom could kill you." But the small creature had made his decision. Taking one last look at his neighbors, he released his grip on the familiar stone. Immediately, the current seized him, and just as the others had predicted, he was tumbled and tossed across the rocky bottom. His small body struck stone after stone, each impact bringing pain he had never experienced while safely clinging. Yet something remarkable began to happen. As the creature continued to surrender to the current's power, refusing to grab for new anchors despite his pain, the water gradually lifted him higher from the dangerous bottom. The tumbling ceased. The rocks could no longer reach him. Now he flowed with the current itself, no longer fighting its direction, but becoming one with its movement. As he traveled downstream, creatures in distant parts witnessed something they had never seen. Here was one of their own kind, yet he appeared to be flying through the water, moving with the elegant power of the current itself. "See a miracle!" they called out. "A creature like ourselves, yet he soars. Surely he is the Messiah, come to save us all." The flowing creature heard their cries and felt compassion for their misunderstanding. "I am no more Messiah than any of you," he called back. "The river delights in lifting us all free, if only we dare to let go. Our true work is not clinging to the bottom, but embracing this voyage. this grand adventure of trust and flow. But the creatures only cried louder, "Savior, Savior!" Even as they spoke, they tightened their grips on rocks and roots. They watched until he disappeared around a bend, then began weaving legends about the miraculous savior who had briefly graced their village. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, you only lose what you cling to. This ancient teaching illuminates the profound paradox at the heart of human experience. We spend our lives grasping for security and control, believing that our safety depends on holding tight to familiar circumstances. Yet in this very grasping, we create the suffering we seek to avoid. Why do we cling so desperately when the current offers to carry us toward unknown adventures? Zen Buddhism reveals that from early childhood, we learn the known is safe and the unknown dangerous. This conditioning becomes a spiritual obstacle when it prevents growth beyond familiar limitations. We also suffer from the illusion of control, believing that by grasping circumstances, relationships, and identities, we can stop the natural flow of change. This creates enormous tension because it puts us in opposition to reality itself. Life is constant movement, and when we resist this truth, we exhaust ourselves fighting currents far more powerful than our individual will. Consider the areas of your life where you find yourself clinging. Perhaps it's a relationship that has outgrown its original form, a career that no longer brings joy, or an image of yourself that now constrains your growth. The current of change will flow whether we resist it or not. Our choice is whether to exhaust ourselves in futile opposition or discover the grace available in conscious surrender. The Buddha said, "Nothing is permanent except change." Water doesn't fight the mountainside. It finds the natural pathway down. When we learn to move with life's current rather than against it, we discover effortless effectiveness that rigid resistance can never achieve. Tonight, as you rest in this moment's stillness, what might you be ready to release? Perhaps it's a worry about tomorrow's challenges, a resentment from yesterday's disappointments, or a way of defining yourself that has grown too small. Can you feel into the current of this moment's aliveness and trust its direction? As the Buddha taught, let go of what has passed. Let go of what may come. Let go of what is happening now. Relax, right now, and rest. In this trust, we discover that the current we feared would destroy us is actually the very force that can carry us home to our true nature. Now, let us explore a story about the patient path to wisdom and the paradox of urgent seeking. This is the teaching of the one-eyed student. In a peaceful valley, surrounded by cherry trees, a young man had heard stories of a renowned Zen master whose students achieved profound realization through diligent practice. Filled with spiritual ambition and eager to transform his life, the young seeker traveled many days to reach the master's monastery, his mind burning with determination to attain enlightenment as quickly as possible. When he finally arrived, dusty from the road and bright with enthusiasm, he immediately sought an audience with the master. The old teacher received him in a simple room overlooking a garden, where monks moved slowly among vegetables and flowers, their movements unhurried and graceful. "Master," the young man said, bowing earnestly, "I have come to study Zen with complete dedication. I am willing to work harder than anyone has ever worked before. Tell me, if I apply myself with absolute diligence and unwavering effort, how long will it take for me to find Zen?" The master sat quietly for a long moment, watching the young man's eager face. noting the tension in his shoulders and the urgent energy that radiated from his posture. Finally, he replied thoughtfully, 10 years. The student's eyes widened with surprise. 10 years seemed like such a long time when enlightenment felt so urgent, so necessary for his happiness. Surely, with the right approach, the process could be accelerated. But Master, he said, leaning forward intently, what if I work very, very hard and really apply myself to learn fast? What if I meditate longer than the other students, study more texts, practice more intensively? How long then? The master considered this with the same careful attention, then replied calmly, well, 20 years. The young man's face showed his confusion and growing frustration. This made no sense at all. How could greater effort result in slower progress? Perhaps the master hadn't understood the depth of his commitment. But Master, I don't think you understand how serious I am about this, he said, his voice rising slightly with urgency. What if I really work at it? What if I dedicate every waking moment to practice, sleep only when absolutely necessary, and push myself beyond all normal limits? Surely then I could achieve realization much faster. How long would it take then? 30 years, the master replied without hesitation. By now, the student was completely bewildered and increasingly agitated. Nothing the master said made sense according to his understanding of how learning worked. In every other area of life, music, martial arts, scholarship, harder work produced faster results. Why should spiritual practice be different? Master, I do not understand, he said, no longer able to hide his disappointment and confusion. Each time that I say I will work harder, you say it will take me longer. This seems completely backwards. Why do you say that? The master's expression became gentle and compassionate, like a father explaining something important to a beloved child who was old enough to understand. When you have one eye on the goal, you only have one eye on the path, the master explained quietly. Ancient Buddhist wisdom tells us, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. What emerges from this story is a profound teaching about the nature of spiritual progress and the paradox of goal-oriented seeking. Why does intense goal fixation actually slow our spiritual development? Zen Buddhism reveals several ways that excessive focus on attainment creates obstacles to realization. First is the problem of divided attention. When part of our consciousness is constantly measuring progress toward an imagined destination, we cannot fully inhabit the present moment practices that actually cultivate awakening. Consider learning to play a musical instrument. If you spend half your practice time obsessing about when you'll be good enough to perform publicly, that energy isn't available for the careful attention to finger placement, rhythm, and tone that develops skill. The music emerges through complete absorption in the present moment relationship between musician and instrument, not through anxious projection toward future competence. Second is what Zen calls gaining mind, the subtle grasping that turns spiritual practice into a transaction. When we practice meditation to get enlightenment, study texts to accumulate wisdom, or cultivate compassion to become better people, we're approaching the path as consumers rather than participants. This gaining mind creates a fundamental split between who we think we are now and who we imagine we need to become. The Buddha said, "What you are looking for is where you are looking from." This profound teaching points to the very heart of the Master's lesson. Zen is not something we attain, but something we recognize. It's not a destination we reach, but the very awareness with which we walk the path. This ancient wisdom illuminates why urgent spiritual seeking often becomes self-defeating. When we're frantically pursuing enlightenment, we're operating from the assumption that our present experience is somehow inadequate or incomplete. But Zen teaches that the seeking mind itself is the very awareness we're seeking to find. Look deeply at your own experience of learning and growth. Haven't your most profound insights often come when you weren't actively trying to have insights? Perhaps while walking in nature, washing dishes, or simply sitting quietly without agenda. These moments of natural awareness reveal what the Master was pointing toward. That wisdom emerges when we stop dividing our attention between here and there, now and then. Zen Master Huang Po taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way." This teaching invites us to examine our relationship to spiritual practice itself. Are we practicing to become someone different, or are we practicing to recognize who we already are? Are we walking the path to get somewhere else, or are we discovering that the path itself is the destination? The student's error wasn't his desire for realization, but his assumption that it existed somewhere other than in his present moment experience. Each time he proposed working harder, he was actually moving further from the natural awareness that practice reveals. Like trying to catch your own shadow by running faster, the more urgently you chase it, the more it seems to flee. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called just sitting. Meditation without gaining mind, without agenda, without dividing attention between practice and goal. This doesn't mean we become passive or lose our dedication. Instead, we bring wholehearted attention to each moment of practice, allowing insights to emerge naturally rather than forcing them through willful effort. Consider how this teaching might apply to other areas of your life. Perhaps in relationships, where trying too hard to be loved often pushes others away, or in creative work, where forcing inspiration typically produces stilted results, while relaxed attention allows natural creativity to flow. Tonight, as you notice your mind racing toward imagined destinations, the person you want to become, the peace you want to find, the understanding you want to achieve, can you remember the Master's teaching? Can you gently return both eyes to the path, discovering that the journey itself contains everything you thought you were seeking at its end? Buddha spoke of this when he said, "There is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way." By walking the path with undivided attention, we discover that what we thought lay at its end was present in every step. Tonight, as our shared exploration gently concludes, can you recognize that the tranquility you've encountered isn't some elusive goal, but rather an inherent quality always accessible to you? Can you feel that the deep calm you've connected with tonight resides not just within these narratives, but within your own immediate awareness, patiently awaiting your acknowledgement? The Buddha wisely stated, "We are shaped by our thoughts. We become what we think." Pondering this profound insight, recall that inner serenity and understanding emerge not from external conditions or fleeting experiences, but flourish from the core of your own being, available in every breath. Throughout tonight's listening, each story has presented an enduring lesson, consistently highlighting the same liberating truth. Discomfort diminishes when we loosen our hold. Inner liberation naturally arises when we release what binds us, and genuine peace emerges from perceiving clearly, beyond distortions and knee-jerk responses. Even if your thoughts occasionally wander, even if a flicker of unease returns, the wisdom you've taken in tonight is now firmly rooted in your consciousness, prepared to support you whenever called upon. As you prepare for rest, consider that these timeless teachings have illuminated not some far-off route, but a way of living fully engaged right here, in this very moment. In the quiet moments that follow, allow yourself to sense how subtly your perspective has shifted, how effortlessly your breath now moves, and how peacefully your heart settles, undisturbed and receptive. These teachings serve as reminders that authentic understanding isn't concealed on distant peaks, nor confined to ancient writings. It radiates clearly and undeniably in the everyday simplicity of conscious attention. Tonight, you've glimpsed that reality, a reality that becomes evident when we simply pause and observe. As you transition from this calm interlude back into your daily rhythm, carry with you not only the stories themselves, but the profound sense of ease and clarity they have sparked within you. May this tranquility remain with you, guiding your path through both bright and demanding times alike. Thank you for joining us on this journey at Sleepy Monk. Sleep well.